Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCast, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Because I am based in Los Angeles, as well as a couple of other people who work on the staff at RChain, I just first wanted to bring up the fact that the fires have definitely been affected us. Luckily, because I live, in the middle of LA, I have not been at risk of evacuation or anything like that, but it's been definitely quite smoky where I am. And I just find it really interesting how life is just kind of going on here, which I find quite incredible. So I wanted to talk about the fires. And I also wanted to, Greg, tell you that today there's going to be a huge climate strike downtown with Greta Thunberg. She's going to be here. So I'll be going to that.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. So why am I saying thank you? I mean, I didn't organize it, but yeah. So there's going to be a huge climate strike. I'm sure there'll be tens of thousands of people, if not more, because it's happening at such a crucial time. I mean, there's like dozens of deadly fires happening all across the state. And I don't think it's any mistake that Greta decided to come here kind of one of the later points as she was traveling throughout the United States, because she's so incredibly popular here in California. And my understanding is that the point of the protest, I'm sure that the fires are going to be mentioned, because here in California, we're dealing with that. It's getting more serious every year. We're having like an exponential increase of acres burned. And but also, it's my understanding that the point of the protest is to put pressure on Gavin Newsom to completely divest from fossil fuels. Because even though California is technically, some kind of climate leader legislatively, we still drill quite a bit of oil. So basically, those are my topics for today until Daryl shows up and gives us some more to talk about. So yeah.
So one question I have is, how would blockchain figure into, for example, oil divestment, or how would blockchain fit into the organization of a climate strike?
Well, I have just written to a bunch of different organizations that are working on a bunch of different blockchain organizations that are working on decarbonization technologies, which I'm not sure if they're directly related to oil divestment, fossil fuel divestment, but they are definitely doing decarbonization projects. And I think that those projects need a blockchain component, and because it's so complex, the systems are so complex, as we've talked about in previous calls, and maybe you can also talk about this because you're so eloquent about this. I find that a lot of the projects that have a trading component or like a tokenization component, those can be really amazing. And also I found that a lot of them have an agricultural component, which is really cool. There's a really wide array of different projects that are working on decarbonization, but I think we definitely need to move away from, taking more fossil fuels out of the ground. Obviously, the whole point is to keep them in the ground. So, any project that is going to help us transfer energy around the grid, there are a lot of great blockchain projects that are working on like doing P2P transfers of like solar and wind energy, and helping people to just personally divest from fossil fuels. I think that stuff is really forward thinking. But yeah, I mean, there's so many amazing projects out there, and maybe other people know of more projects, but I've invited a bunch of those people onto this call. So hopefully some of them will get back to us
So
and they'll want to talk to
I'll
us
take
more,
a crack
which I
at
think would be
answering
awesome.
that question, Greg. So this is Ian. So in many of our industries, and certainly in energy production, there is outflow of all kinds of pollutants, including carbon, that aren't tracked. And we call these externalities or economic externalities. So things that really should count count in the negative column, but don't, because we're not measuring and tracking them. So we need more sensor information. We need to track the pollution that's going out. And then we can also correlate that with data that's collected from satellite, for instance, from NASA GOES, or there are some very large public data resources that collect and aggregate environmental sensor data and even weather data from around the world. So if we had, the very most basic component of blockchain is to have an immutable ledger. So when we have places to store this data that can't be questioned, then we can start to measure up one industry to another, one company to another, how their what the effects of their pollution are, and to start creating a system for carbon credits or trade-offs for tracking, and a market to capture these externalities.
Yeah, I think it's so important to measure all of those effects. And I think it's so important to hold different corporations accountable when they pollute, because they need to clean up. I mean, like, for example, I think it was just in Brazil recently, there was a horrible oil spill. And I think I read, I need to check on this because I just had thought of it since, from what you've just said. But I believe the story was there was this, horrible oil spill. You can look it up because it's happening, right now. They're not sure where the oil has come from. It's washing up on the beach somewhere on the coast there. So there's obviously, no hope that the government will hold anybody accountable or even investigate where the oil is coming from. So if you don't even know where it's coming from, then the corporation is not going to clean up. So basically what you have is like thousands of volunteers basically just going out on boats and on the beach and just like washing the animals and scrubbing everything and just trying to clean up the oil with buckets, like by hand. People get sick. And so this is like a crazy situation. But obviously, like, blockchain could provide a ledger, to help keep track of all of these different environmental disasters. But one thing that personally I'm not in favor of is a carbon credit system, because it basically just so I think it's tricky. So I think we really need to get to a place where we're talking about like complete, divestment, which is why this protest today is really inspiring, because, all of these people in the younger generation, people who are going to live another 70, 100, more years.
Well, there are layers to it, right? So
Those people are going to have to.
at the base layer, there's just capturing the data and everyone having visibility over what's happening over
Yeah.
who's polluting and who's cleaning up. doing some kind of carbon capture through planting forests or whatever. But
So
Yeah.
on top of that, you have social coordination and different kinds of marketplaces to, like you were saying, you don't like the carbon credit system.
Yeah.
So there are other alternatives as well. But so the first layer is just everyone having the same view of the data, and then on top of that, how we coordinate around how to solve the problem.
Totally.
yeah, so we we had a portfolio company called Expansive, and that's kind of what they were doing. They called it digital feedstock, and their plan was to have sensors throughout the refinery so they could start tracking not only the oil, but as it flowed through the refineries, they track as it breaks down into the other commodities that are produced at the same time as the oil, and to track it all. And then, of course, they were going to commoditize it. But yeah, their whole thing was to collect all that kind of data. So yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm not sure where they're at. Greg, I just sent you a private text because it looks like they went out and raised about $10 million. So
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one more really interesting example is I found at least one, but I'm sure there's more blockchain-based projects that are working on keeping track of, well, facilitating and also keeping track of how exactly decarbonization, how efficient it is, and proving that it actually is working. So like if somebody is going to pollute somewhere, they can actually trade credits with somebody else, like a farmer or somebody somewhere who's going to decarbonize using a different type of technique, like with the way they farm, or planting a new tree. Or of course that isn't as good as keeping the old trees in the ground, as Greg and I often talk about. But anyway, there's projects out there that are blockchain based that are able to prove how much carbon is actually taken out of the atmosphere. Projects like Nori and other projects that like they swap credits for flying. And basically, if you fly, you can work with this company, you pay them some money, and then they pay somebody else to negate the carbon that you spent on your activity and put the carbon back into the ground in another way. And then they prove that that actually happened on the blockchain. And so I think that's a really interesting project. So
yeah,
anyway, those are a few examples.
yeah, there's a company out there. They're kind of friends of ours. I met them last year at Blockchain Week. They were really excited about our chain, and one of them poked their head in like a few months ago. Yeah, and their whole blockchain is based on rewarding people for carbon reductions. Provable carbon reductions rewarded by a token, and then tracked on a blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think it's just
I gotta
really
remember
important
their
that we
name.
move towards an economy and just a society, as a world that rewards people for the right kind of behavior. Because I don't know if anybody knows about the presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, but he talks about some really interesting things, like how, the ways that we measure a healthy society, they're missing some things. Like we talk about stocks and we talk about, all these different things, but we really don't talk about, how mentally well people are. We don't talk about, a lot of different metrics. Like we need to add more metrics to the American scorecard, both economically and psychologically. And I think if we do that, then it'll become a lot easier to reward both people and companies for doing the right thing. And I think a lot of these blockchain projects have really good ideas on, first off, how to do that, but second off, how to actually keep track of when it's actually happening.
Yeah, but I have to say that this is where decentralization becomes really critical. One of the things that I found genuinely terrifying was President Xi's suggestion that people declare their original intentions. in an immutable blockchain with respect to the Communist Party. That's we're now
Oh
so like,
God,
yes, that's exactly right.
that's terrifying.
No, that's exactly right. So this is why when you talk about rewarding behavior, who's rewarding whom? If it's the big brother state is rewarding all the peons, we haven't made any progress at all. That's not what's going to get us to a scalable and regenerative life on planet Earth. Right? Decentralization is really critical, so that we get this ecosystem, this robust network of behaviors and rewards. But there isn't one central party in the sky that's controlling everything. That kind of surveillance capitalism will not be very beneficial for us on planet Earth.
And how do you plan on stopping that exactly, if that is the intention of
if
the direction they want to use the technology for?
The point is, this is exactly why I've been so insistent that the technology, which I've known about for quite some time, only be in the hands of the public. It's the exact same reason why people like David Sinclair is making sure that the aging related research is in the public. Because if it turns out that there ends up being a Methuselah class of long-lived rich people, and the rest, are living an average of 70 years or less as slaves, that's not good. And one of the first ways to prevent that is to make sure that all the information is available in the public. And the same thing here. That's why our chain is open source technology. Anybody can use it.
I guess I'm not following the argument, because if the technology can be used in a negative way, if it's in the public, it can be still used in a negative way. It doesn't matter if it's locked down in with a bunch of kleptocrats, because the technology, it can be used negatively in any instant.
No, but you understand the equation changes, right? You don't have to participate in someone's network. You can say, you know what, Goldman Sachs, I don't need your services anymore because I have this alternative financial network that's decentralized. And you can build your own financial network if you want, but I don't trust you with my money. Why? Well, because I've looked at the last 20 years of your behavior and it's abysmal.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, if someone has a bunch of guns and they want to use them, they can use them. So if the government tomorrow decided to ban all crypto transactions, that doesn't mean crypto transactions would suddenly stop. But what I'm saying is there's consequences living in a current society if the governments or powerful actors decide to say no more. And then there's going to be war, essentially.
But no, there isn't going to be war. All the governments would have to collude to stop crypto. And we see how good they are at colluding right now. That doesn't work at all, right? So that's the nice thing about crypto is that, and that's the whole point of decentralization. With decentralization, you start to have something that's a little more open and free. You start to have more options, more choice. And it's that kind of spaciousness that I've been, are advocating for quite some time. But you cannot have, a nanny state or a police state, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior.
I understand.
That's not scalable.
I understand, but I would also say that once you have that open space and spaciousness, because the governance is not caught up, you have terrible industrial accidents. So you have huge bursts of these speculative bubbles. You have the Dow bug, and these are very minor things compared to what is potentially coming down the pipe, especially when you actually deploy RChain and it scales as you're saying. So, I mean, there's just more work to do, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, I'm just skeptical of it being a utopia in the next 10 years. I hope this is the way forward, but I'm very skeptical because it only takes one bad accident, right? One nuke to go off, or an oil spill off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico to really, really screw things up. you know. And the same thing is with the same thing that goes for any type of financial technology. And actually, we're even beyond that point right now, because this is way beyond just ledger-based transactions. You're also talking about the transfer of data over a secure, basically secure system that's also completely open source. So it's like BitTorrent but on steroids, with payments and probably other things that you're going to incorporate on top of that stack, smart contracts or whatever. That it's mind blowing, really. Anyways, fun talk.
If there, once you start to have, then you can begin to have a group response. So that's the thing that's been so difficult, is once the resources are concentrated in the hands of a few, say Google and Facebook, Amazon, Alley Cloud, these kinds of concerns, then there isn't a lot of option for people. In order to participate in the economy, they have to play with those players. So a really good example, of course, and one that I always thought would be the first test case, is the creative class. Because I always thought that it's since you're dealing with alpha software, you want to go after lower risk things rather than higher risk things to begin with. So with the creative class right now, they are forced to play in an economy that doesn't reward them appropriately, right? So they have to participate in Facebook and Instagram and all of these things, and effectively the fruits of their labor, they're just not able to reap the reward of the fruits of their labor. But with an open network, they can go directly to the people that support them. So that's an example, but it ends up being an example that you can repeat over and over and over again. So people really can vote with their feet. They can vote with their hard-earned capital. They can vote with their support, because they can go directly to parties that that are doing the kinds of behaviors that they think make sense. And this is what I was talking about when I was responding to Nora's idea, right? So rewarding regenerative behavior, scalable behavior, is now done because people, they're able to find out about better behavior, and they go there directly without having to go through intermediaries. Now, of course, there's always going to be people who set themselves up as intermediaries and brokers, but the network supports an open and direct connection. That's the key. That's the key insight of decentralization. If you have to go to trusted third parties, then we will necessarily end up in these kind of command and control situations. But if you can go direct, then you have a lot more sway when it comes to network effects. People can literally vote with their feet.
Oh, look, Daryl is here.
Hey, what happened? Did Greg just drop out there?
He's muted.
Oh, okay.
Wait, did we just hit an 8 there, or am I disconnected?
Were you finished with your point, or did you drop out?
He dropped out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, continue, Greg.
No. Please, my Bluetooth device stole my audio for a few seconds. I don't know what happened over the last few seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, Daryl has now joined us. Daryl, we've been talking about, I mentioned the fires, of course, because I thought that was such an important thing to mention. And also there's a big climate protest happening today with Greta Thunberg in LA, which I'm going to in a couple of hours. And we also have been talking about some just different organizations that I've been contacting, some different blockchain organizations that are involved with the climate that I thought might be, kind of cool. We have been discussing some of that stuff, and we also had a nice discussion about decentralization. But I thought, Daryl, you have some great points to bring up about some news from last week and some other things. So I just thought maybe since you joined us, if you want to bring some of that stuff up, that might be great.
Yeah, cool. Sorry I'm so late. I had a whole bunch of things. I had to drive my wife to the airport and get my child off to school. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff that's happened this week. One thing that's kind of more close to home here in Canada is that Google's, or Alphabet, I should say, their parent company's Sidewalk Labs social experiment has been given conditional approval in Toronto. So they bought a whole whack of land, prime real estate on the waterfront of Toronto, and with the intention of turning it into a smart city, so to speak. They wanted like something like 130 acres, but the city gave them 12 to start with. They're kind of being a little cautious, which is wise. But it's a pretty interesting kind of, I would call it like a glimpse into what their potential future plans are, and how they're intending to kind of move their surveillance capitalism to a whole other level. So I'm going to post a link in the chat for anyone who's interested to kind of continue exploring the idea. I think it's something that's really vital, that is important for everyone to kind of confront.
Yeah, totally. That's such a good idea to post this. And, I was just watching an interview with your favorite, Greg, with Joe Rogan and Ed Snowden last week. If anybody hasn't seen, I think it's got 10 million views now.
I've seen it. Yeah, it's quite good.
I've turned location services off on my phone, and I deleted Facebook and Facebook Messenger off my phone. So I'm taking baby steps. Okay, baby steps.
Yeah, that was great. You sent me that link, and he does a really great job at kind of really explaining a simple, stripped down idea, and he basically ended up with the result that you have to be able to remove the battery, and the phones are designed to not let you do that.
Right. Yeah. The whole interview is like 3 hours long, which I haven't gotten fully through. And he mentions your favorite guy, Jaron Lanier, which is so great. But you also wanted to mention something about nuclear power. I think it was. Did I see that in the notes?
Well, so is Ian on the call? Hey, Ian. Yeah. So Ian brought up something to me that I didn't even know about, some kind of fusion technology based around boron. And so I've been kind of exploring that, and it's quite interesting.
Yeah, there are a couple fusion technologies that look really interesting. The one I mentioned was PB11, or proton boron 11, where there are a couple private companies that are developing this fusion electricity generation system, and they say they're about maybe 10 years out. And then also I saw yesterday that there's a new patent from the US Navy on another type of fusion reactor, which is very small and looks pretty interesting. So the idea is to run these to do carbon sequestration or water purification, or other things that are very, very energy intensive that can help us out.
So it's not strictly for generating electricity.
Well, yeah, I mean they're both for generating electricity.
Okay.
But like you could use this power to do that because you could do things with this amount of power that
To take carbon out of the atmosphere,
yeah,
would take
right.
a tremendous amount of power, right?
Yeah, or like
I see.
desalination of water, or things that are like
Yeah,
super,
yeah.
super intensive. So is boron a safer thing to use for nuclear power than
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Boron is
that the point?
boron is very safe and it's plentiful. I mean, maybe you can even you can practically eat the stuff. If you're familiar with borax, which is an additive that you add to detergents in your wash load.
My daughter uses borax to make slime.
Yeah, right. And the way they're using it is kind of slimy as well. The challenge is to take this slime, or in this case, like a plasma, and suspend it in space as they zap it with giant lasers.
It's very Dr. Evil sounding, but in a good way. So what I've read is that it goes up to 2.7 billion degrees Celsius. That's the operating temperature for boron fusion, apparently.
Yeah, but it's also supposed to be quite safe.
Yeah, there's let's see, it says the PB11 reaction produces only helium, hence radioactivity is eliminated as a primary design factor, and fusion has no possibility of a nuclear runaway.
Well, it generates a lot of X-rays, the boron reaction, but those X-rays can even be captured and turned into electricity. You can easily shield X-rays.
All right, cool.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who think that nuclear is like a unavoidable piece of the energy pie, and some people think that that's unnecessary, but
Yeah, that's an interesting debate. I like what's his name, Stuart Brand, the Whole Earth Catalog guy. He's a advocate of safe nuclear as an option, and I don't know whether that's an oxymoron or not, but it's nice to know that
like,
there's other possibilities.
Clean coal, is that real or no?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously no, but safe nuclear, that's a new one.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I didn't want to change the subject, but the article about what Sidewalk Labs is doing is
no, it's crazy.
pretty. I mean, it's right directly connected to what we were talking about before. I mean, Sidewalk Labs wants to create a capital-based state where where you have cops that are not plugged into the judiciary but are paid directly by this future city, right? This is it's a pretty scary thing that they're talking about, and it's exactly the thing I was trying to point to, that we need a decentralized technology to balance out these tendencies.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the headline of that article is "Leaked Document Reveals that Sidewalk Labs' Toronto plans for private taxation, private roads, charter schools, corporate cops and judges, and punishment for people who choose privacy." So they're trying to build this kind of like, in their world, Google utopia, which is basically surveillance capitalism on steroids. And, I guess like perhaps the leading voice on surveillance capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff. There's a quote here I can read from her talking about it. So she says, "Toronto now stands first in line to become surveillance capitalists' real-world petri dish. Sidewalk's proposals reveal the full arc of the new logic. With astonishing audacity, it claims the city as its laboratory and the lives of citizens as its free raw material for data creation, ownership, computation, and monetization. Sidewalk Labs celebrates the Toronto waterfront as its meaningful testbed and product service trial venue. To this end, the company unilaterally declares that all public and private experience occurring within this experimental zone would be deemed urban data, available for monitoring and actuation. In these endeavors, Sidewalk can be confident in its dominance as it rides the wave of Google's leading position in machine intelligence. The real outcome.
Product. Oh my God. Product service trial venue. Ew.
Yeah, that's a quote from them. Meaningful test bed and product service trial venue. The real outcome here is the privatization of the city. In this version of our digital future, algorithms replace laws as the computational truths that expand private capital's revenue streams replace democratic municipal governance. The city is no longer a crucible of creativity, which is innately unpredictable. Instead, it becomes a zone of certainty for the sake of profit. Yeah.
And what do good citizens of Toronto say about this?
Well, so just it's 2 days ago now, the city granted conditional approval. So Google wanted a whole bunch of stuff, and the city kind of went, "You kind of creeping me out." So they gave them, a certain amount of leeway, but it's still. So one of the things Google wanted, if I'm remembering right, is that they wanted ownership of public data, and the city didn't grant them that. So
Man,
it's definitely going to be a pretty bizarre experiment. I'm sure they have many, many willing participants. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And I think, it gets to the thing that when I first jumped in on this call, Greg was talking about the whole concept of intermediaries and how the direct connection capability of what blockchain and R-chain kind of promise is an antidote to these kinds of scenarios.
I guess I'm not following the issue. What exactly is the issue with this experiment?
Oh, you mean the problem?
Yes.
Why it's a problem?
In very clear terms.
Okay, so the whole idea of how some of the most powerful companies in the world have risen to power is based on the idea of a new resource. So the resource that rose the American empire was oil. And that resource has now been replaced by us, people, our data. So the way that Google and Facebook look at our data is a resource to be mined. It's something that they can just grab and take as their own.
Okay, wait. But they don't do that because they offer free services. And you can opt out of those services at any time. So you get something for exchange of that data. Whether you need to get more is a different question. I guess I have a problem with this premise because if you lay out the three options, which is either government control of your life, private company control, or complete public decentralization control, I'm very skeptical that things would be different in different buckets. Like there's gonna be, maybe it's less bad if we have complete decentralization, or maybe it's more incredibly bad, but we can't even begin to conceive how bad it could be because we haven't been there yet. We haven't gotten there yet. So
actually, we
the people who have the
really,
data,
really good sense of what it means to have corporate police and corporate judges. Yeah, we've been seeing the slide of the U.S. system towards that for a long time, and we know exactly what that does in terms of the prison populations. Right?
There's people who have our data who do not have our best interest in mind, and there's companies or governments that are, have been corrupted or infiltrated, whatever, to work against us in these things. We can, through the decentralization, if we're smart, we can certainly.
I understand what you guys are saying. What I'm trying to say is you can opt out.
But that's exactly the point. If you go read that proposal, if you go and read that proposal for the Toronto experiment, when you opt out, you are denied services.
Okay.
And this is the way the world is going, Christian. Sure, I can opt out. I could opt out of the thing we're using right now, which actually might be spying on us. But it's going to become increasingly difficult to opt out and still be a member of any semblance of a society. It's so pervasive. It's all around us everywhere.
That's
No,
exactly right.
I for years I opted out of Facebook, but did I really have a choice? If I want to talk to my children and my colleagues and people I meet, I'm sort of forced to join Facebook.
Yeah, the notion that we live in this free system where we have a choice, Christian, I think you might want to revisit that.
I fundamentally disagree. I fundamentally disagree because you can opt out. You can go to places where there is no laws, there's no infrastructure, there's no government, right? No private companies that have protection. There's places on this planet where it's completely off the grid,
Yeah,
right?
but what happens,
You
Chris,
always have that option.
Right.
what happens if you live in Toronto now and you've lived there for generations and you don't want to move?
I guess there's going to be you're balancing utopia versus hell, and you have to find a sweet spot. And in that sweet spot, someone's going to get screwed. It's just the nature of how we live. I mean, I don't believe in that it's possible to build a system that is going to be perfect. So I just
No, yeah.
No, it's
I don't
not
think
about
anyone's
perfect.
suggesting
It's
that.
not about perfect. It's just,
You yourself if
we
you have
know how
control of your
bad
personal
things can get,
information,
right?
If you have control of your personal information, you can use it for your own benefit rather than someone else's benefit who doesn't have your interest in mind. So decentralization means that we will have control